It is time, the results are in, the community have voted, and now we get to see the power allocated to every single operator in the game. So I've received a total of 1,800 submissions, but not all of them are counted to the final results, because there's some anomalies. I thank the new players and a whole lot of you for participating, but there are some people who didn't vote a lot of units. Like for example, they only voted for 10 or 20, which means that they didn't get to try so many 6 stars to truly rate. So I've made the minimum number of submissions, like the number of units that you have rated, to 20% of the roster, so you must have voted for at least 25 people to be counted. That's one of the ways that I clean it. We also have some weird behaviors, like for example, some people voted the same number for every single unit, which if that were the case, what's the point? Because there was someone who voted everyone at 7.2. Like, that doesn't do anything. And then there was also some people who decided to fake their submissions a little bit and be like, oh, I really love Ho Hei Yak. Yeah, genuinely, I had 2 of the submissions being Ho Hei Yak at 7.2, and then nobody else was submitted. So I've omitted all of those anomalous results to clean it up and show you all a nicer presentation of the stuff. So now that that's done, it's 1,400 submissions being compiled together. Now this is a general list, okay? I know some people are gonna screenshot this, make some Twitter posts and be like, oh, this is what the AK community thinks. I think what's more interesting isn't looking at this chart itself, but instead looking at the detailed option that I have within my page. So when you're assessing this site, which you can, by the way, go to arcpedia.net, visit the power scale section, and you're gonna see the results in over here. So these are all the units, and I've basically rated them from their average on top first, and then there's also the median, Q1 to Q3, range, and distribution. So I'm just going to click on Wang to show you the example. You can actually see a box plot. For those of you who study statistics, then you'll be mesmerized by this. So box plot is able to show what the middle majority of the people have voted. So you're more concerned about the green box, basically. The grey box means it's kind of like straying more to the outside of the people's rating, but it still counts as the total ratings after all. So you can look at both to study it, and then there's the distribution graph, which is basically, you know, the pattern of how many people have voted for certain ratings. So for someone like Wang, I think the community basically collectively agrees that a unit like him is super strong. And it's quite interesting because if you take a look at the range or the box plot that we have, Tragodia is even more stretched out than Wang, which means that some people do not feel like he's on that 7.0, 7.1 status. They actually feel that he might be weaker. And then you have Whistlerdale, which also has the same pattern as Tragodia, but there is actually also quite a bit of people leaning to the left, which is the reason why that you see the average turns out to be this 7.14, highest for Wang, 7.13 and 7.11. And then you take a look at Exia, again, you can see it stretches into the 6.8 zone. But the green zone is still about the same. So the way that my compact diagram works also is that it rounds up or rounds down the number. So in order for Wang to have been showing up as 7.2 over in this chart, he needed to be 7.15. So he didn't cross that mark. So I guess the game is still balanced because now you have 4 crazy operators that the community thinks are of equal-ish status. Well, Exia nearly fell because Exia is on 7.06, which means if she was at 7.04, she would have went into the 7.0 category. Now, I want you guys to observe the range numbers over here because range tells you how much we as a community agree upon a certain rating. So if the range is very small, it means that all of us think about the same way of a certain unit. But if the range is very big, like for example, take a look at this. If I sort it by the highest range, you have Rydian, Crown Slayer, and Silac at a 0.5 difference. So their distribution graph ends up looking like this. Now for the case of Rydian, I think some people missed the memo where I stated that you're not supposed to consider their use for IS. The reason for that is that I do not want it to be a complicated first attempt at this. But in the future, other game modes will also be considered when you guys are rating. So you can give a different number for general stages, you can give another number for IS, for RA, for SSS, and then I can create an even more in-depth graph of basically how we score for every single game mode. Now for what it is though, take a look at Crown Slayer, right? So Crown Slayer isn't necessarily considering the IS mode because that's what Raiden would be, but Crown Slayer is so divided. You know, some people think she's one of the most amazing units to use, and there are some people who still think that she's one of the worst units to use. Where are we standing onto Crown Slayer? But of course, the middle majority is still such that a lot of us hover between that, 6.4, 6.5 range. So meaning to say that Crownsia is kind of an average 6-star now, especially thanks to her module. So during these results also, even though you don't consider IS and RA, you can still consider their alpha modules, beta modules, and also the delta modules, if it so happens, because those can be used for general content. Silac as well, take a look at the distribution graph. Again, very split. Why are some people rating Silac at 7.2? Some people think that Silac is just as good as Wang. So with this being the first tryout for a poll, understandably some people might have mistaken that this is a popularity contest. So it's gonna skew the results a little bit, but at the very least, if you look at the green plot, that is kind of the people who understood the assignment, and then I think that's the number that you wanna look at a lot more. Now, if we look at the other people as well, take a look at Ling, right? The range that we have is smaller, but yet at the same time, the external 5th percentile to 95th percentile range is a lot smaller than the units that we saw before. So go ahead and play around to take a look at everybody's numbers. At this point, I'm going to add a caveat as to how you read this, because I can already see the comments and I bet those comments don't even reach this part of the video, or if they did, they don't understand what I'm trying to say. When you see these numbers, or even when you see this list, okay, don't be concerned about the idea that a certain unit is higher or lower than someone else. Because the truth of the matter is that if the difference of the two units aren't very big, like it's a 0.01 difference, the community rated for this, we averaged it. If more people participated, maybe the numbers will change. Maybe they'll equalize, like how Haruka and Silver Ash are exactly at 6.99 right now. Or maybe, the tables will turn and then logos will be higher than Upinius, but probably not by much. In fact, what I would say is that these numbers, okay, you could, look at them and how they fall into the different tiers. I think the number you really want to look at is the Q1 to Q3, because that tells you the range of what we think a unit is, right? Like for instance, when you take a look at Hoshiguma the Breacher, her hovering is between 6.9 to 7.1. So some of us think that she's really, really 7-star caliber, and some of us think that she's close to being that. But after all, a 0.2 difference is not very far for us. So don't be so alarmed by, a unit just being 1 tier off, because it's not that big. Or even 2 tiers off. Now, if a unit is 3 tiers off from what you expect them to be, then that becomes pretty interesting, because you can cross-reference to the range over here. Like for instance, if you take a look at someone like Surtur, right? Surtur has a range of 6.6 to 6.9. So some of us think that she's not, like she's still an above average 6-star, but she's also not the biggest up there. That's what we think. But there's got to be some other people who think that it's a 6.9. Perhaps that's an interesting thing to have a case study for, like why do we think so differently about a certain unit. So what I'm saying is, through this statistic, don't sweat this too hard. Use it to observe the behavior of what we think about a certain character. But I think pay more attention to these numbers, because it tells you, what are our opinions towards stuff, right? Look at this, 6.5 to 6.68 for quite a bit of the operators here, from Golden Glow, Ray, Mantra. And then you have someone like Ling, where it goes a tier higher, right? 6.5 to 6.9, and then so on and so forth. So I think the graphs, the distributions, the ranges are going to be a lot more fun for you guys to take a look. So go ahead, enter arcpedia.net, go to the power scale option, and play around with all of these results for yourself. I do think that some of you want to hear perhaps a more extended version of this, where you want me to talk about the results more in detail. So I'm not going to do that in this video. This video is just to encourage you guys to enjoy the community rating. Perhaps we'll have a second season, but not so soon. At least a month or 2 later on, where I will introduce more parameters that you can rate for. Because right now for this one, I stated that the premise is just general content. It's the first time that we do this, and hopefully I can get your feedback, right? If you guys like this tier list, if you want certain improvements for it, if you didn't understand it before and now you understood it, comment all that within this video, and I will see how we can do another sort of community project in this instance. So we could include things like finally having the IS modes, RA mode, SSS. If you want even different kind of fun community tier lists, like not about the power of the unit, but how much we like a certain operator, like a popularity contest, I can always host this on our brand new website. So I would love to read all of that. Again, if you want to see the extended cut version, it will be the next video right after this. So I will see you guys there. Bye bye.